Hey guys, welcome back to Analyzing Horror. My name's Lauren, and today we'll be talking about the visually stunning modern folk horror movie, Midsommar. So Danny and Christian are a young American couple whose relationship is on the brink of falling apart. However, when a family tragedy keeps them together, Christian reluctantly invites a grieving Danny on a trip with his friends to a once-in-a-lifetime experience to witness a midsummer festival in a small remote Swedish village. What starts off as a carefree summer holiday in the North European land of eternal sunshine quickly turns sinister when the villagers invite their guests to partake in festivities that quickly turns this pastoral paradise into something increasingly unsettling and deeply disturbing. So this is definitely one of my favorite modern horror movies, and there's so many things that I love about it. I really love how vibrant and colorful and bright this movie is, while at the same time being very unsettling and deeply disturbing at times. In addition, there's also this strange sense of discomfort that just builds and builds throughout the storyline. It's just such a unique way to create horror in a movie, and honestly, I just think Ari Aster is a complete horror mastermind. Speaking of which, I absolutely love Ari Aster. He's such an incredible creator. I love how detailed and intricate he is with his storytelling, and I also love how specific you can tell he is with each scene in this movie. I also loved how he was able to bring this creepy cult to life with all their dancing and their singing and just their overall mannerisms, as well as their special language and their little just so strange and utterly unsettling. I also watched an interview recently with Ari Aster, and I just thought it was really cool how he said he wanted to combine a breakup, unhealthy relationship story with folk horror, and I just thought those two going together was a very interesting concept. He also mentions that at the core of this story is about family and grief, and I just really love how there's so many layers with his movies. There's so much to dissect and sift through, and I feel like with each rewatch I get something new out of it, and I just really love that. So fair warning, I'm going to be talking about the storyline and some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, make sure to pause, go watch the movie, and then come back afterwards. All right, let's get into my thoughts on Midsommar. I'd like to start off by talking about performances and some of my favorite characters. So first off, Florence Pew is amazing as Danny. She does such an incredible job, and she blows me away with every rewatch. I just loved her performance so much. Like her animated facial expressions, her emotional range, and her ability to portray mental instability was so captivating. It was just incredible. And all of her emotional breakdowns are extremely distressing to watch, and you feel like you're experiencing them alongside Danny. And at least for me, her distress just weighs so heavy on me. I just feel so bad for her character, especially knowing how fragile and basically broken she's been this entire movie, which just makes what happens in the ending all the more harrowing for her character. I also thought Jack Reynor did a good job as Christian. He basically played the perfect asshole. He's just such a terrible boyfriend, as well as just a bad friend in general. Like how passive he is with Danny, as well as stealing his friend's thesis idea at one point. Like he's just the worst. That being said though, I don't think anyone deserves the outcome that he got. I also absolutely loved Will Poulter as Mark. Like I just thought he was so funny while also passive aggressive at times. And I just feel like he stole every scene that he had a couple of lines in. He was definitely the comic relief in this movie. Like he was just so funny and had so many great lines. Like one of my favorite scenes of his is when everyone is high underneath the tree outside and he's freaking out about the midnight sun in Sweden, and he demands that everyone lay down with him so that he feels more comfortable. And then that iconic line when someone's approaching him, he's like, oh fuck, a new person. I can't handle a new person right now. Another one of my favorite scenes of his is whenever he's discussing ticks while they're walking through a forest. Mark asks, does Sweden even have ticks? And someone replies, Sweden actually has a tick problem. And he goes, what the fuck? His over-obsession with ticks throughout this movie, by the way, is so funny, but also very relatable. I would be the exact same. Another one of my favorite scenes of his is whenever a village girl just lures him off and she's like, oh, I'll show you. And he's just like, oh, okay. Guys, I'll be right back. She's gonna show me. I just love how he doesn't even ask any questions. He's also in one of my favorite comedies ever, We're the Millers. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it yet, because he's hilarious in that too. Okay, let's move on to the storyline and some of my favorite scenes. First off, I absolutely love that the very first thing that we see is like this prophecy tapestry, where if you look close, you can see the entire storyline in this tapestry. And of course you don't know that the first time you watch it, but after a rewatch and you look a little bit closer, it's like, oh my God. And that makes it all the more foreboding. Also, that entire opening scene where Dani finds out that her sister killed herself as well as her parents. Man, was that so intense and heavy. I also thought the building of tension was done really well in the opening scene. Like, you could just tell something bad was about to happen, and it was just very effective. Also, this opening scene had some incredible cinematography. Like, when we were exploring the crime scene, there's this long shot where we go up the stairs and we see the parents' room, and then it pans over to the sister's room. And I just thought that was done really well. And then that transitions to Dani severely grieving on the couch while Christian is holding her. Then we also get this really cool zoom in shot on Dani and Christian, and then the camera goes above them out the window, and then it seamlessly turns into the opening credits scene. And I just think it's really interesting how the word Midsommar evokes summer, springtime, sunlight, vibrant colors, but the opening credits scene has darkness and snow in the background. And I just thought that contrast was really interesting. In addition to the cinematography, I thought the score was really great in the opening scene. Like, it was so intense and heavy and just booming, like it shakes your rib cage and you just feel the emotions through the music, and it was just so powerful, and it significantly added to the emotion in the opening scene. In addition to the cinematography and the score, I also thought the lighting was very interesting. I liked how before Sweden, the world was just very dark and gloomy and dull. Like, even if there was light, there was no color, there was no vibrancy. It was just a very dull world. But then when you get to Sweden, everything is vibrant, sunny, full of color, and I just thought that contrast was so interesting. In addition, the score does a huge transition as well. Like I mentioned earlier, the score is very intense and heavy before we get to Sweden, but then once we get to Sweden, the music becomes more mystical and folk and just much more lighthearted. And I just thought it was so cool how this movie does a complete shift in tone once getting to Sweden. I just thought that was very interesting. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Dani and Christian's relationship is constantly on the brink of a breakup, even after her loss. All the scenes between them before they get to Sweden is so painful and hard to watch for me. Like, poor Dani is constantly trying to keep the peace, whereas Christian is just so passive with her. Like, their relationship is so painful to watch. And your heart hurts for Dani because she just wants so badly for this relationship to work. But Christian just is so unwilling to be there in the relationship and just, oh, Christian. So for example, there's this scene after a party where Dani and Christian are discussing that Dani was blindsided by the fact that Christian is going to Sweden, and she had no idea. He bought a ticket and she had no clue that he was going. And she was justifiably irritated with him, just asking, like, why didn't you tell me? Like, you bought a plane ticket and I had no idea. And I was also blindsided at this party. Like, what's going on? And then he has the audacity to get all defensive and then wants to leave the apartment because she's attacking him. And the conversation gets completely turned around and she ends up apologizing to him. And I think that scene is the most painful for me because she was so justified in her irritation. Like, hey, like, why didn't you tell me you're going on a trip? Like, I'm your girlfriend. Like, why don't I know about this? And then he gets defensive and gaslights her. She's like, oh no, I'm sorry. No, please stay. My heart hurts for her so much and she deserves so much better. And I just can't stand Christian. I also really liked this bathroom transition scene. We get an aerial shot of Dani entering an apartment bathroom, and then the camera kind of swivels as she closes the door, and suddenly she's in an airplane bathroom. And I just thought that was really cool, not just for like the camera swiveling. I also liked it was an aerial shot. But in addition, I really love that this transition shot shoots you forward in the story. Like, again, we go from an apartment bathroom to an airplane bathroom a couple months later, and they're on their way to Sweden already. And this is one of the more memorable scenes for me because of the fluidity of the cinematography. And I just really love how that jumps the storyline into everyone on their way to Sweden. Also, I have to praise Florence Pew once again and her emotional breakdowns as Dani. They're just so dreadfully captivating. And I just think she does such an incredible job in all of those scenes. Also, the scene as they're driving into the remote village, like, oh my God, the cinematography in that scene is so incredible. There's this one part where the camera is panning along the side of the driving car and then makes it to the front of the car. And then it slowly starts to turn upside down. So the road is on the top of the screen and we're driving forward, and then we suddenly see the Midsommar sign on the bottom of the screen. And then as we approach it, the camera kind of like does this somersault and then does like a twirl in the sky and then ends up back behind the car. And I just think that's such a beautiful scene, and you feel like you're flying, and I love that so much. And I also thought it was really cool because it kind of hits the nail on the head that all of these characters' worlds are about to be flipped upside down. I also love that scene where they're sitting under the tree high on shrooms. I mentioned earlier that Mark has some really great lines, but I also really love this scene because there's this captivating zoom in shot on Danny as she's fully feeling her high. I also really love the visual where she looks down and grass is growing through her hand. I thought that was really trippy. In addition, the countryside behind them is absolutely gorgeous, so there's that too. Speaking of which, I really loved the drugged, inebriated scenes. I thought they were really trippy and pretty, but also very disorienting. And I thought it was really cool how the movie almost makes you feel like you're on the trip with these characters, especially the disorienting part. I really appreciated that scene where Danny is freaking out, but she's also still high on shrooms. And imagine being high in a place that you're unfamiliar with. Like, that would be very unsettling, and I just thought that was a good scene too. I also really loved the set design in the Swedish village. Like, that yellow triangle hut is a modern horror icon at this point. I also learned recently that they actually shot like in the middle of a Hungarian field, and they built that village from the ground up. Like, they created that entire set. I just thought that was so cool. I also really loved the artwork on the tapestries as well as the artwork on the interior of their sleeping quarters. I thought they were all very detailed and colorful, and I also thought it was very cool how upon rewatches you can notice that the interior artwork actually depicts what's in store for all of these characters. And I just thought that attention to detail was really cool. I also loved how once the ceremonies begin, there's this hauntingly ominous vibe, and a deep sense of dread just starts to build and build throughout the rest of the storyline. And there's a sense of unease and discomfort that you just can't shake once the ceremonies begin. The first example is that outdoor dinner scene. I actually really liked that scene where they all pick up their forks and waves along the table. That was really, really cool. But this is also the first time that the friend group as well as the rest of the outsiders begin to see the mannerisms that this cult has. They have this weird vocal language as well as the constant and you just get instantly uncomfortable because you can automatically tell that this group of people are very different. And then, oh my god, that rock jumping scene. I actually remember the first time watching this movie and I had no idea what was going to happen, but you could just tell something bad was about to happen. Like, the building of tension was really well done in that scene. And I think this is the most gory scene in this movie. Ari Aster sure loves his head trauma. So the older woman jumps first and she hits the rock at the bottom of the hill face first, so plenty of trauma there. But then the older man jumps next and he actually only severely breaks his legs. And oh my god, that scene. Like, I squirm in my seat every time I watch this scene. Like, holy hell, his legs. Oh my god. I can't imagine the pain this man must be in. And then this scene is made all the more distressing whenever he starts wailing out in pain and then the rest of the cult starts wailing in response. So there's just this horrendous chorus of wailing and crying, and it's just really, really unsettling. And then if that wasn't enough, they take out this giant wooden mallet and then hit the old man in the face several times to take him out of his misery. And once again, Ari Aster loves his head trauma. We got lots of lingering, slow shots of that, and that was so, so brutal. And then after that ceremony, all of the outsider visitors start mysteriously going missing. So first, a girl's fiance just leaves without her, and then she also mysteriously goes missing. And then one by one, Denny's friend group begins to get picked off as well. And it's at this point where not only do you feel this deep sense of dread, but also this sense of entrapment and isolation in this cult. Like, at one point, Danny has a nightmare that Christian and his friends leave her in the middle of the night. And I really love this nightmare scene because there's a part where she opens her mouth to scream, "Wait," and like black smoke comes billowing out of her mouth. And it's just a very haunting scene. And it just sort of adds to this terrifying feeling that they're starting to feel trapped within this cult. And that unsettling feeling just continues to build and build even further. And speaking of unsettling, oh my god, that entire intimacy scene with Christian and that redhead villager girl, holy hell. That whole build up to the intimacy scene was really creepy too. They basically drugged him and got him fully prepped for that room. And then when he walks in that room, like, that visual will forever haunt me. Like, the redhead is sprawled out on flowers, and then behind her is a whole line of middle-aged women completely naked, holding hands and humming and swaying. And if that's not disturbing enough, whenever Christian decides to start doing the deed, they start getting involved. Like one of them starts getting really close to their faces and is singing to them. Another one is helping Christian. It's just so freaking weird and it's just so unsettling. And oh my God, like I will never forget that scene. It haunts me. And then when Christian completes the deal, he snaps out of it and looks around him in horror at what he's a part of. And he takes off running butt-ass naked through the village, but it's already too late. His fate has already been sealed. Although I really liked that disturbing scene was contrasted with the maypole competition dance. I have to say, I think this is my favorite scene in the entire movie, mostly because of the rhythmic dancing and the hypnotic music that's being played while they're dancing. I also really love that we get an aerial shot of like the maypole looking down on the dancing and it's like this swirl and it's just very, very beautiful. I also read somewhere that this scene took about 2 weeks to shoot. I just thought it was really cool how the cast had to dance around the camera and be aware of where the camera is at all times. If you watched my review on Last Night in Soho, it's kind of like that big dance scene that I mentioned. Like they're dancing around the camera and they just have to be very aware of where the camera is at all times. And I just think that kind of choreography is very, very impressive. And after Dani wins May Queen, she discovers what Christian is partaking in and she understandably vomits and begins to have an emotional breakdown. And then we get this really interesting scene where a bunch of the women start circling around Dani and they partake in her emotional breakdown with her. They end up on the ground all together and they're all wailing and one of them is holding Dani's face and just really focusing in on her emotions. And I actually have mixed emotions about this scene. Like while I think it's kind of sweet that they want to be there for her during her emotional breakdown, like they are part of the cult that coerced Christian to do what he's doing right now. So it's kind of like, thank you for the emotional support, but also get off me. Like maybe that's the point where it's kind of like disturbing that they want to be there for her, but they also are doing these things to them. So maybe that's the entire point. I don't know, but I just have conflicting feelings during that scene. And so it's at this point that Dani is completely trapped in this cult as their May Queen, and the horrors only get worse from there. Speaking of the horrors, I wanted to quickly mention how I found it was very interesting that it wasn't just like the fact that it was based in a sunny environment with a bunch of vibrant colors that made all of these horrors horrific, but also all these cult members were always so smiling and kind and friendly, even whenever they were doing these incredibly sinister things to their visitors. And at least for me, that's one of the things that completely catches me off guard with this movie every time. They just seem so warm and friendly, but then they bash someone over the head with a hammer, right? And it's just incredibly disturbing to me that they could have a smile on their face even when they're doing something horrible to you. So after celebrating their May Queen, they begin to fill in their yellow triangle hut. They fill in the hut with all of the dead bodies of the missing guests, a paralyzed Christian stuffed in a bear suit, and 2 of their own living cult members who have volunteered. And then they begin to set the hut ablaze. And this scene is so horrific, but it's made all the more horrific whenever the fire reaches the living cult members and they begin to start screaming out in agony. And then that makes the rest of the cult members outside of the hut to start wailing in agony along with him. And it's just so creepy and disturbing, and poor Dani is amongst all of this chaos. And she looks on in horror as the hut is fully engulfed in flames. And then we get the last few shots of the movie where again, she's looking at the hut in absolute horror and it's just like complete distress on her face. And then suddenly a slow, deranged smile spreads across her face, and you can just tell that she's completely lost her mind and fallen to madness. And this ending is so horrific, and I feel absolutely devastated for Dani as a character. And I think that's one of the most disturbing things about this movie for me, and that Dani lost her entire family before she went on this trip. And now her boyfriend and friends are all dead. So there's no one to track her down. So she is completely trapped in this cult for the rest of her life. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, that deep sense of isolation and entrapment just comes to a complete head at this ending. And I just find it utterly horrifying, and it leaves a pit in my stomach as the credits are rolling. There's just something about this theme in horror where a character has absolutely nothing left, and they're basically forced into a decision that they wouldn't have chosen otherwise. Just that deep sense of helplessness and again, entrapment and isolation, and you just have no one looking out for you. You have no one there to save you or help you. Like, it's just so harrowing and bleak, and it just fully sets me on edge. Like, it's one of the darker aspects of horror that just really, really gets to me. Like, obviously I'm referring to Danny in Midsommar, but I'm also thinking about the movies The Witch and Hereditary. And if you've seen those movies, you know what I'm talking about. And it's just one of those aspects about horror that just fully gets under my skin. Lastly, I wanted to talk about a couple more aspects that I really loved about this movie. I have to say, I think this is one of the most vibrant, colorful, and beautiful horror movies that I've ever seen. Not just for the sunlight and the Swedish countryside, but also in the set and costume designs, all the props and visuals, and the seamless and fluid cinematography and camera movements. Like, every scene was important and had more than one thing going on at a time. I also really loved how every scene took its time on screen, and there were multiple lingering shots to let you like fully soak in what was happening on screen. And most of these lingering shots are on either disturbing or unsettling scenes, so it just continues to add that discomfort that you feel throughout the storyline. And lastly, I thought it was really cool how you could tell that Ari Aster was very precise with all of his actor and prop placement. You could just tell that every scene was meticulously thought out, and everyone and everything was put in a very specific way for the shot to be just perfect. And I just really love that attention to detail, and it's one of the things that I just absolutely love about Ari Aster's work. He's just so creative and artistic with his movies, and I love his vision. All right, those are my thoughts on Midsommar. Like I said, I love how vibrant and bright the movie is while also being genuinely unsettling and disturbing at times. And it's just such a unique style of horror that makes you so uncomfortable and sets you fully on edge. And like I said earlier, Ari Aster is just a horror mastermind, and I cannot wait to see what he does next. So what did you think about it? Do you have a favorite character or a favorite scene? Also, if you're also an Ari Aster fan, do you like Hereditary or Midsommar more? Let me know in the comments. By the way, Hereditary is on my movie review list, so don't worry, it's coming. Also, this is just a reminder that I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. So if you're interested in following me on those and you haven't already, the links are in my description box below. And as always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so Black Phillip knows you'd like to live deliciously. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again very soon in the next video. Bye!